Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekha Charivag, Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. I am coordinating the paper on Sociology of Gender. Today we are going to discuss the module Family and Community as a Site of Violence. Before we understand the whole module about how family and community as a site of violence, we need to understand that why family could become a site of violence. We have to understand the whole ideas of power, control and honor that runs through the whole institution of family. Further, we also need to question the binaries of public and private, which also lead to different construction and understandings of violence in India and elsewhere. In this module, we are going to examine how violence is enacted within the family and also via the family. Further, how violence is constructed within the wider community, especially in the context of the hierarchical gender relations. Introduction. The United Nations Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, UN General Assembly 1993, defines violence against women as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion or arbitrary deprivations of liberty, whether occurring in public or in private life. Women experience violence across a wide continuum in private, public and in virtual domains, from strangers, familial people, intimate people, etc. Current research and factual data have shown that different types of abuse and violence takes place within the family, but at the societal level, family is still considered to be a private domain which falls outside the bounds of legal observations and sanctions. A recent study by the World Health Organization reports that family violence cut across almost all countries in the world. In India, the Indian National Family and Health Survey officially recorded data pointing to the existence of domestic violence from different states. The new bill for the prevention of domestic violence was passed in India after a lot of struggles and efforts. Though commendable, these efforts are hard to implement because of the culture of silence that shrouds gender relations within the family. It then becomes very important to look into the socio-cultural factors and reasons that are enmeshed within such issues. The traditional norms of Indian society, being largely patriarchal in nature, tend to condone and shelter the existence of such gender-based violence, which are not only engraved in individual socialization, but they also get embedded in the structural formation and institutions of society. There is an escalating need to study and examine these societal constructs which lead to such behavior in order to have more informed and action-oriented policy directives which could be formulated and implemented to counteract family violence. Research needs to give focus, among other things, on clearing the myths and ideas surrounding the family roles, gender hierarchies, the relation with the larger world, and manipulation of material and rights that take place through them. Among all social institutions, family enjoy a unique and special place in the social imagination of people as an ideal unit. It is seen to have the most crucial and, more importantly, the most private of existence. Thus, any scrutiny into the sacrosanct space of family is often met with resistance and doubt. The view of family as a site of power contestation, domination and subjugation is met with adversity and is wrought with tugs amongst religious discourses, individual identity versus community identity. In India, an individual's identity is either subsumed under and reflected by his or her family and community, which is further enveloped in caste, religion, cultural and other affiliations. The institution of family continues to be the primary site for gender relations, and family and kinship ties play a crucial role in establishing such relations and also the rules and norms for power hierarchies and resource allocation. Kinship, which is one of the most important factors for organizing social relations, also become the basis for organizing economic, cultural, as well as sexual and reproductive practices. Marriage and family in India are seen more of in collective interest rather than individual interest or desires. These institutions are underlined with values like honor, shame, respect, sacrifice, and placing family before everything else. All these values are geared towards making family the representative of larger community and hitherto putting all its actions under the scrutiny of whichever community it belongs to. This sense of collective honor and shame leads to violence in the face of any transgressions that might occur, which put at risk the honor or status of a particular community. Thus, these acts of violence are usually meted out towards women, as the notion of honor in Indian patrilineal structure is closely tied to the chasteness and movements of the woman of the family or community. The patrilineal fact of controlling women's sexuality leads to violent lashback towards any kind of transgression by women, such as going against caste and community lines for marriage or within the family for not adhering to norms set down by the male members. According to Dubé, gender roles are conceived, enacted, and learned through a complex system of relationships which is embedded in the family structure and wider context of kinship. The family structure performs two very important functions. One, it reflects a rule of recruitment and marital residence, and in what way one generation replaces the next. Two, its configuration of role relationships which decided allotment of resources, sex-based division of labor, socializing children for future roles. In India, family structures and patterns of kinship are largely also tied to the institution of caste. The membership of caste groups is determined by birth and has a strong component of boundary maintenance, the onus of which falls on women because of the role in biological reproduction. The patrilineal setup condones certain acts of violence which are meant to be preventive measures against women taking control of their own sexuality, which could lead to the disruption of the system of material and resource allocation. Acts of violence like female feticide, dowry deaths, domestic abuse, rape, etc. work and sustain themselves under the patriarchal banner which permeates community and family life, and is also internalized by men and women at an individual level, which in turn leads to such values and ideologies permeate into state machinery and legal institutions and their policies. According to Kumari, the process of globalization sweeping through the globe is imposing another set of complications and contradictions on this notion of family and community. The new meanings of family and community are increasingly being dictated by market forces, and this has both positive and negative outcomes. On the one hand, this has led to greater freedom and democratization in the sense that in order to have better standards of living, women have been educated and allowed a modicum of autonomy in order to move and work freely. This modernity has allowed for policy intervention for the purposes of women empowerment, economic and political power for women, legal reforms, etc. On the other hand, women seem to lack control over their resources and earnings and suffer from discrimination and violence. In Kumari's view, even though women have entered the public arena of formal work and labor, the private arena of family values and violence is strictly guarded private arena from which they cannot run away. She mentions in an article that studies indicate that one of the definite fallouts of globalization and marketization has been an increase in the rates of domestic violence on women. The nature of arranging marriages has changed from being based on the physical attributes of the bride and the economic standing of the groom to the intellectual and earning potential of the bride and economic potential of the groom. Numerous marriage bureaus help in selecting and deciding marriages based on such criteria within a dominating larger criterion of religion, caste and subcaste. One of the major influences of globalization has been the overexposure to worldly pleasures and luxury items which form the essential items of dowry. The practice of dowry and consequent dowry-related violence causing death was one of the reasons why the conjunction of family and family violence came into the forefront. In addition to all the traditional criteria, physical attributes, religion, caste, etc., women and girls now have to deal with the additional criteria of being educated, worldly and working. At the same time, globalization is causing dowry demands to grow due to the want of new and better resources available in the market. Records of the National Crimes Record Bureau show that dowry deaths and incidents of torture by husband has increased by almost 10% between the years 1998 to 2003. In the following segments, this module will follow the logic of shame and honor and how it underlines violence in families and the ways in which they are acted out. Patriarchy, son preference, izzat or honor, reasons for violence. For Patricia Robright, the family is often a site for exploitation and violence, but even academics tend to overlook this fact. This is probably because family is deemed as a cultural ideal and a focal point of identity. The matter is compounded by the surrounding environment, which limits interaction between the professional and academic and the private sphere of the family, thus rendering it inviolable. Further complications arise from the notion of izzat or honor that the family holds, which enables a culture of silence and exploitation to flourish within the family system, and at the same time is unavailable for questioning from outside. This notion of honor propagates violence as well as inhibits women from seeking help against violence. The honor of a family or a community is embodied and represented by the women of that family or group. It is embodied in the sense that women's bodies are seen to be as property of the family and as a body to be protected from violation from outside. This makes it imperative for families and communities to lay down strict rules for the purposes of controlling women's sexuality as a preventive measure to the threat on their honor. Women have to adhere to strict rules regarding mobility, interaction, marriage, and it is regarded as a moral responsibility of the girl or the woman to uphold the honor of a family, and any transgression or even perceived transgressions can lead to violent outbursts from the family and larger community. Gandhi Yoti describes classic patriarchy as a system where girls are given away in marriage to a household which is headed by the husband's father, and here they were subordinate not only to the men but also to the most senior women. This patriarchal system shapes gender relations in which include construction of masculinity and femininity for men and women to adhere to and be socialized into. Numerous attributes are prescribed not only for women but also for men, which are tied directly to the feminine and masculine social identities. Women historically having been viewed as caretakers of children and household, fulfilling the roles of daughter, wives and mothers, are expected to be passive, non-expressive about their sexuality, meek, obedient. Men, on the other hand, are seen as protectors and bread earners, have to be controlling, strong physically and emotionally. These norms are enforced and reinforced through media and popular culture, state and religious institutions. In both public and private spheres, men are charged with the responsibilities of upholding their honor, family honor, and that of the larger communities. This notion of honor is strongly connected to the notions of masculinity and femininity and is maintained by adhering to social rules, norms regarding the same. Transgressing these norms is seen as detrimental to not only the individual but also tarnishes the reputation of the family and possibly the community to which they belong. There is also a pervasive understanding that honor is embodied by the woman, but in India, personal honor of a man is tied to that of a woman in his household and family. Hence, patriarchy provides certain incentivized methods of protecting honor, like restricting women's mobility, seclusion or parda to limit interaction and violence. Honor-based killings are defined by the Human Rights Watch as acts of vengeance, usually death, committed male family members against female family members who are held to have brought dishonor among the family. As patriarchy places a much higher value on males, they are seen as the heirs, and it is through them that a lineage is forwarded. It is ideologically condones a practice of son preference. Women in this system are seen as being temporary members of the natal families, as they have to move to their husband's house after marriage. Thus, they are excluded from inheriting land, which is a key clan asset. That temporary membership into the natal family causes men lack value, and the existence of the practice of dowry further lowers their desirability in a household. Dowry is seen as a drain of wealth that is caused by the daughters, for which reason their birth is seen as a burden and thus leads to violence in terms of sex selection in favor of sons during conception. This also leads to a large number of female infanticides and abandonment in order to free oneself from the burden of building a dowry and bringing up a daughter who has the potential to bring about a loss of face and honor in society, in contrast to sons who are protectors and will continue the lineage. While culture cannot be directly blamed for the practice of violence, it does shape and mediate how abuse and violence take place in different groups in different times. The dominant image of women that is circulated in media is that of a wife and a mother, and these representations are meant to create a sense of inadequacy in women and consequently a need to internalize these roles onto their own behavior. This is an effective method of controlling women by shaping their perceptions about life and setting values and norms that women themselves have no handing in formulating. Surveys and studies show that women validate and rationalize acts of violence against them within their families, as they see them as acts which are to be expected and not socially deviant. The molds that are created of loving mothers, obedient wives, create oppressive structures and circumstances which limit the way women think and grow, and also limit their opportunities as free citizens. On the other hand, boys are trained to be aggressive, competitive and controlling so that their glorified role of a breadwinner can be achieved by them. The shroud of silence that is worn by women is powerfully institutionalized throughout the society. Through idioms of lost izzat, public disgrace, shame and dishonor, women are kept silent about their subjugation. Even in professional counseling, women are asked to focus on keeping their marriage intact rather than breaking away, and think of the ways of coping, understanding and adjusting rather than changing the way things are. This is an effect of the patriarchal nature of our society and the state, thereby their reform institutions as well. To understand the nature of violence, it is also important to understand the status of women in the structure of material production. According to Kelker, violence runs along the lines of power in the sex-gender system, and the family as a primary institution with its division of labor by sex underlies the system. Thus, studying family authority relations is an important means in making visible violence that is organized around it. The subordinate role of women in the family is duplicated in the larger society, which can be seen in lower wages, sexual harassment at the workplace, poor health care, educational facilities to women, which have been justified by the assumption that since men are main breadwinners and the head of the family, women's employment opportunities and their concerns are not as important as that of the men. Female feticide and infanticide. Feticide is a practice through which the sex of the fetus is determined with the help of ultrasound, in vitro testing, scan, and then the fetus is killed through the process of abortion. Female feticide then is a practice through which the fetus is aborted once it is determined that the sex of the fetus is a female. It is also referred to as sex-selective abortion. According to the results of the 2001 census, the deficit of young girls compared to young boys, especially being pronounced in the state of Punjab, Haryana, and western areas of Uttar Pradesh. The practice of female infanticide, which was rampant during the colonial times, was presumed to have died out with the prevalence of social reforms aimed at empowering women. With the advent of new reproductive technologies like amniocentesis and ultrasound, which can be used to determine the sex of the unborn fetus, it is a sex-selective abortion that is gaining ground, that is female feticide. The simplicity of the test and the ease of their availability, along with the prevalence of son preference, made female-specific abortions very popular. India pioneered in legalizing induced abortion under the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act of 1971, which specifies the reasons under which abortion may be performed. One of the stipulations under the Act is that abortions is not performed by trained doctors in facilities. Registers for performing abortions are deemed illegal. At the same time, the limited number of facilities and lack of access to them by people lead them to seek illegal facilities which put them at risk. The increasing number of female feticides led to the passing of another act, the Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act of 1994, which denied individual practitioners, clinics or centers to conduct tests to determine the sex of the fetus or inform couples about it. Even with these measures and monitoring, in many places this act has been violated because of the need created in the market by underlying desire of sons by the majority of the people. In states like Punjab, Haryana and Himachal Pradesh, which are economically prosperous, the prevalence of female feticide is remarkably unprogressive. According to Bose, the main reason seems to be easy access to medical facilities such as ultrasound and abortion clinics, no lack of money to pay for these tests and abortions, good infrastructure like roads which cut down cost and time in travel. Causes that contribute this abhorrent practice are the fear of dowry, but families who are rich and can afford to pay dowries also partake in these practices, and that, according to Bose, is largely due to the high esteem and social status that is awarded to family with sons. One of the causes could be that the sons lack restrictions and mobility, can migrate in search for better opportunities and jobs which are of value to the family. According to Patel, the ability or inability to reproduce has cultural meaning. Sonography provides people with the ability, or at least with the potential for desirable biological outcome, thereby reducing the difference between desirable and actual outcomes. Societal pressures and the process of socialization lead to women understanding their ideal being mothers, more importantly being mothers to sons if they want to raise in social stature. This, combined with the lack in decision making in the sphere of family planning, makes them susceptible to agreeing to such practices and even perpetuating them. Dowry related violence. In 1950s, dowry was seen as a problem of giving expensive weddings and unreasonable demands that prevented many middle class families from finding suitable grooms for their daughters. The failure of the bride's natal family to meet these demands often led to harassment of the bride by her husband and in-laws, and sometimes even death, which were termed as dowry murders and were usually committed by burning young women in the house. The Dowry Prevention Act, passed in 1961, did not do much to curb these incidences because, according to the law, the families that gave dowry was as guilty as the family who demanded them, and thus no complaints were registered for a very long time. Consequently, women's groups started focusing on these dowry deaths more actively and started calling them forced suicides and murders. In the year 1989, there were 358 cases of women's death by accidental burning. These numbers kept on increasing, and in 1982, Saheli, a small-scale women's center, was opened to provide counsel and shelter to endangered women. Increasing number of dowry deaths led to the amendment in the dowry legislation passed in 1986, but it still did not curb the practice. Dowry deaths brought about a decade of great legislation, but unfortunately for its implementation, the state dependent on men whose view of women and their place has not changed. Eventually, the fact of violence against women in the form of dowry deaths and harassment was mixed with the issues of communalism and thus sidetracked. Dowry-related deaths occur for a multitude of reasons. One of them being the apparent subservient nature of the bride's natal family in relation to the marital family, because women being devalued causes the groom's family to be on the higher ground. The fear of losing face or izzat in the community lead to most families of the bride paying the dowry demand so that the daughter would not be returned to them in disgrace. In connecting dowry deaths to greed for dowry, the state names dowry as a male culprit rather than addressing the subjugation and devaluation of women. I believe that by simply eradicating dowry will lead to drastic improvement in women's lives. To ignore the prevalence of other kinds of violence against women like sexual harassment, female feticide, forced marriage. Domestic violence. Violence is often used as a tool to socialize family members into behaving according to prescribed norms and rules, and in India within an overall perspective of male dominance and control. It entails the following. Physical violence includes slapping, kicking, hitting, pushing, choking, burning and threatening, and assault with a weapon. Sexual violence includes sexual coercion, sexual harassment and rape. Psychological abuse including demeaning, insulting, threatening, isolating and abandoning behavior. Financial abuse include deprivation of material goods, control of money and control of assets. There are different forms of domestic violence that exist. Intimate terrorism. This form is almost entirely male perpetrated and is found in studies of women experiencing long-term abuse and harassment from their husband. Violent resistance, a form of violence that some victims of intimate violence use to resist their partner control. Situational couple violence. It does not come from the partner's need to enforce control over the other, but arise from certain circumstances or situations which give rise to tension and conflict. Wife beating is the most common form of abuse worldwide, irrespective of class, community and religion, and even caste background. It has been argued that it is not only a woman's dependence that makes her susceptible to violence, but even working women are subjected to domestic violence. One important characteristic of intimate partner violence or domestic abuse is that a lot of women do not report it or even acknowledge its abuse. The occasional slap or rebuke is seen as part of being a woman, and it is only when the abuse is extremely violent or deadly that women seek help. There is widespread tolerance for wife beating. Some reasons are also considered justifiable, like disobedience, neglect of household duties. Myths surrounding wife beating, like it only takes place among lower classes and backward classes, were broken when Delhi-based organization Saheli came out with findings that wife beating was common to all social classes. Marital rape is another form of violence under the umbrella of domestic violence and is a much hushed topic. Like child rape, marital rape is also underreported and women mostly do not talk about it. From the 1980s, feminists developed new organizations and new institutions galvanized by the endemic violence against women. By now, violence against women was not a new topic nor a phenomena that had risen during the colonial time. Initially, cases of domestic violence suffered from poor law and tardy litigation. The police saw domestic violence as a family or a private affair and often used their cells as spaces for mediation and compromise. Such indifference towards domestic violence caused more and more women to file false and exaggerated charges of dowry harassment, because anti-dowry laws promise legal action against abusive husbands. The introduction of new legislation that criminalized violence in the home, Dowry Death Law, Section 498A, and the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act of 2005 has been successfully passed. This law does not differentiate between married and unmarried couples and focuses instead on the intimate partner violence. Has more important features was to secure women's rights to the marital home in the event of eviction or abandonment. This act has substantially changed the way public views domestic violence. Nandi argues that it has been the state's first comprehensive response to domestic violence and implies the concept of human rights in the heart of gender relationships and family. It also redefines the borders of privacy and the extent of public intervention. Honor killings. Honor killings are acts of retribution of violence usually perpetuated by a male member of family to a female member who is perceived to brought dishonor among the family and community. The perceived dishonor could be for one of the following reasons: going against the cultural norms of dressing and attitude or behavior, wanting to terminate one's arranged marriage or marriage according to one's choice, especially intercaste marriages, engaging in sexual acts outside of marriage, involvement in a non-sexual relationship is perceived as inappropriate. Honor killing violence like acid throwing, honor killing occur in society where there are collective notions of honor and shame. According to Chaudhary, the norm of arranging marriages in India is contingent upon following the prescribed caste, class and other marriage norms, and breaches in these norms are not tolerated, leading to inciting violent backlash from communities. And assertions of one's choice in marriage is also seen as an affront to the most virtuous concept of modesty and chastity. In situations where marriages are arranged by senior members of the family, an independent assertion or a love marriage disrupts the family hierarchy and power relations within the family as well as social hierarchy. In rural areas, most intercaste marriage alliances are dealt with at two levels: immediate family, kinship network, and at the level of community acting through traditional panchayat, and by the state acts upon modern egalitarian principles. The community or biradari acts through open shows of disapproval and actions like social and material boycotting of the family and of the individuals who are perceived to have transgressed the norms, and in case of severe transgressions, punishment can escalate to violent and public killings, which may include entire community like lynching, burning, hanging. In case of the state, which operates through local police, these transgressions are often recorded as sex crimes with charges of kidnapping, abducting and rape on the male among the runaway or the eloping couple. Contentious marriages and relations are thus a reflection of tensions in society. By expressing their own agency in their acts, they activate other sources of power, unlike just traditional sources, which give rise to conflicts between traditional and non-traditional sources, and in this process gives rise to violent backlash. As mentioned above, in the whole discussion on the module, we discussed about the reasons and the rationale for violence which is experienced both in family and the community. We have also explored the different kinds of violence which could be seen in these institutions. Further, we also explored about how family could become a site of power contestation and understanding and domination. Further, through this module on family and community as a site for violence, we have also seen how both these, that is family and community, could become a space of control and regulation of sexuality with regard to women, leading to different kinds of violence experienced by them.